President of the Council, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Syrian Arab Republic.
Shukran.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, at the time when the Syrian government is sparing no effort to restore security and stability and to eliminate all pockets of terrorism, the practices of the Israeli aggression continue unabated against my country as they exacerbate the aggression on the sovereignty of my country, in addition to the targeted and systematic targeting thereby of civil infrastructure in Syria. Within 1 week, the Israeli occupying forces targeted Aleppo airport twice with a number of rockets, which caused the airport to become unoperational due to damage of the runway and navigational devices, which has adversely affected, as Mr. Griffiths said, the humanitarian work of the United Nations. The crimes of aggression and war crimes perpetrated by Israel in Syria are exacerbating, and they have become seriously systematic, a matter that requires condemnation and denouncement from the Security Council. Israel should be held accountable for those acts. Thus, we do renew our appeal to the Security Council and to all officials at the General Secretariat in the United Nations to exercise the mandates assigned thereto by virtue of the Charter and to condemn the Israeli hostilities that exacerbate the already heightened situation in the region and which threaten international peace and security. Conflicts and disputes amongst Israeli officials should not be a pretext for them to launch such hostilities. The condemnation by the Security Council of Israeli aggressive acts will not materialize until the United States and its Western allies discontinue their protection of Israel in this council, and until those stop their double standards practices, and most important, until they recognize that if the United Nations does not urgently respond to those aggressions, this will prove to be uncontainable in the future. And in tandem with the Israeli attacks against Syria, the U.S. troops which are illegitimately present in Syria continue their violation of the sovereignty of Syria and its territorial integrity by its continuous support of separatist militias, terrorist groups, and their looting of Syrian oil, natural resources, and other agricultural produce of the Syrian people. In addition to the unilateral coercive measures which are totally illegitimate and which exacerbate the suffering of the Syrian people. Mr. President, throughout the last 10 years, we have witnessed certain Western countries, including what is called the International Coalition, we watched them misinterpreting Article 51 of the UN Charter, as they use ungrounded pretexts and misleading interpretations to justify the attacks and transgression on the sovereignty and independence of other countries. In this regard, I would like to draw the attention of the members of the Security Council to the letter that I have addressed to you on 6th of September on behalf of the government of my country in response to the statement of the permanent representative of the United States justifying the U.S. aggression against my country under the pretext of Article 51 of the Charter. I stressed and underscored in my letter that the only de facto and de jure description of the actions and activities of the illegitimate U.S. troops' presence in Syria is crime of aggression. Mr. President, the efforts of the Syrian government and its partners at the United Nations and UN humanitarian and development agencies to promote and advance the livelihood of Syrians, it continue to face challenges due to the politicization of humanitarian aid by Western donors, as well as the UCMs imposed by the United States and the EU on the Syrian people, and the ongoing illegitimate presence of foreign troops and the disruption by terrorist groups of humanitarian aid. The full implementation of Security Council Resolution 2642, including achieving progress on the early recovery track, means that we are on the right track. However, the disruption and interruption of humanitarian aid and access to humanitarian aid by Syrian people and the failure by donors to honor their pledges as regards funding the humanitarian response plan in Syria are not promising. That's why my delegation looks forward to the informal interactive dialogue before the end of this month, which will enable us to assess the progress made in the implementation of the requirements of this resolution and to identify the gaps as well as to evaluate and assess the methods whereby we can overcome the same. There is another aspect of humanitarian suffering, which is the recurrent cuts and interruptions in water supply in northeastern Syria. For the second time, the Tel Tamr power plant is targeted by rockets by terrorist groups backed by Turkey, a matter that has adversely affected the operation of the Aluk water plant, and that was preceded by the reduction by Turkey of the level of water flow to the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. Water is the lifeline of citizens in Al-Hasaka governorate. However, we heard no declaration, no condemnation, no denouncement of those causing the recurrent interruption of water supply, and we do deplore turning a blind eye to this suffering. As for the humanitarian suffering in Al-Rukban camp, the occupying power, which is the United States, are responsible for this. Putting an end to this suffering will only materialize by closing this camp. The same applies to Al-Hol camp in the northeast, which is controlled by separatist militias backed by the U.S. occupying troops. Also, this camp should be closed after facilitating the repatriation of the nationals of third countries detained there. And Syria is sparing no effort to achieve this goal. Ladies and gentlemen, certain Western countries launched an organized campaign to raise the issue of missed persons in the Syrian Arab Republic in their pursuit to launch an international machinery to clarify the fate of those missed persons. However, the real and genuine goal of those countries is not to clarify the fate of those who were missed or who disappeared because of terrorist groups including Daesh, al-Nusra, and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. During the years of crisis, they do not even seek to clarify the fate of those who were missed or who passed away or who were killed due to the acts of what is known as the international coalition, as well as the barbaric shelling on certain Syrian regions such as Raqqa, Deir ez-Zor, and Baghuz. However, the real goal is to launch a new mechanism which will be no different from all politicized, biased international mechanisms to exercise more pressure on Syria. In conclusion, restoring security and stability in Syria will continue to hinge on Western states stopping the hostile policies and interference in Syrian internal affairs, ending the immoral economic embargo, supporting and ending the support of terrorism, and irrevocably and unconditionally declaring the end of the FTFs and their affiliates file, and the final exit of occupying foreign troops from Syria. Thank you.
République arabe syrienne pour son intervention.